Hey there, and welcome to episode number 7. Thank you ever so much for tuning in. Today's episode is one I hold very dear to my heart, mainly because it's not only about one of my favorite poets, but also one of my favorite women, like in general. Today we're going to be talking about none other than the poetess or the 10th muse, Sappho herself. She was obviously a rebel, a queer icon. I would say like RuPaul status. And a fellow women-loving woman, you know? So put your seatbelts on and get ready to explore some huge, and I mean astronomical simping. Now, introduction. A little background, so, for the people that haven't heard about Sappho. I came to actually know about Sappho after doing some Renaissance art kind of painting on Pinterest. I know, lame. But after 5 hours or so, I came across a painting that really like spoke to me, but not in a good way. It was actually none other than Sappho's alleged suicide painting. And I say alleged for a reason we will discuss later. So, well, sorry to say, but Sappho is another woman that has been attempted to be erased like completely from history in its entirety. However, that wasn't going to really stop the queer army, from finding more information about her. I really just keeping her story alive for around 4 centuries now. Sappho was born in Greece, 630 BC, in the island of Lesbos. Our introduction to lesbianism, which is near to modern day Turkey nowadays. Now, Lesbos at the time of Sappho was more open to women being treated as individuals, which is the bare minimum, but whatever. We'll discuss that later. So yeah, they were more open to individualism than like other places, right? Because of this, women from Lesbos were allowed to be really like opinionated and live their lives pretty freely, not too freely. But we'll talk about that now. So yeah, all of that seems great until like dear Sappho here, when your opinions and views of society are too open, of course you may ruffle many feathers, especially from old religious men. In occasions like these, a lot of people would be exiled to other places for behaving in such innovative ways, I guess. She was just too ahead of her time, basically. And our beautiful Sappho was then exiled to Sicily, where she continued with her studies and started really developing as a woman and as an artist. Now, no one really knows what Sappho looked like or who her parents were, but I generally don't think that matters that much because clearly she had more game than all of us put together. Even though I'm not too interested in her image, I just feel like the whole image thing is really just is not that important. But I did find one of like my favorite descriptions of her, which is from another famous poet at the time who happened to be from the actual same island. His name was Alaseus. I'm gonna call him like that because I don't know how to pronounce that. So yes, he described her as violet crowned, pure, sweetly smiling Sappho. So now we know she had raven hair. Moving on to her work and glorious poetry, where everything kind of gets a little blurry. There's several different paths that she may have taken. None of these are like, there's not really much proof, as with most historical figures. Some claim she was a sort of teacher for a group of all-girl intellectuals in her town. She could have also married who some claim was her husband, and his name was allegedly Cerculus of Andros, which low-key sounds like a cool name. However, when you translate from Greek to English, it literally translates as dick of man. So either this whole thing is true and he happens to be like the unluckiest man alive, or Sappho may have just been the biggest troll of her time. We will never know. If this, however, was true, it is said that she may have had a daughter with her former husband called Clyde. This is assumed by one of her many fragmented poems where she describes she adores her and how she reminds her of a beautiful flower. And really, that's all there is to dissect from the fragments of that one poem. It's literally like 2 sentences, if that. We're going to be moving into her poetry and really just how much influence she had, because she had a lot. Sappho has to easily, and I mean easily, be one of the most like influential women of ancient Greece. Now, I'm going to give some context to the people that may not know a lot about poetry, just like me. Yes, we're ignorant. it's fine. We're going to be discussing different types of poetry or like mechanisms, I guess, or technicalities. Now, for example, plays and verses, these are meant to be performed in person to an audience. Basically, like most theater plays and stuff like that, right? Elegies are poems recited accompanied by a flute, so by melody, which is kind of cute if I do say so myself. Now, lyric poetry or mili usually is recited with some type of rhythm, similar to kind of like a song's melody, you know? Now, Sappho's poetry was usually composed of lyrical poetry, but not your usual or typical form of poetry. She instead created her own type, and it's measured by the Sappho metric, right? Which is made of 3 lines of 11 beats and a final line of 5. Because of her innovative and pretty groundbreaking creations at the time, and because she created such an expansion when it came to poetry and writing in general, many musicians actually came from everywhere across the country to learn her technique. In her lifetime, she actually wrote as many as 10,000 lines, which is actually quite a lot. At the time, it was pretty groundbreaking, mainly because a lot of people just couldn't even write. So if we're going to compare it to that, this was a pretty big achievement, right? Now, sadly, we only have preserved 650. Of course, because humans, we can never take care of things. Whatever. Tragic. She also wrote about 9 novels slash books in her lifetime, which she actually wrote on papyrus scrolls, which stayed in rotation and circulated quite widely. One of these was actually kept in the Great Library of Alexandria in Egypt. You may be wondering, where did all her work go? Well, in theory, Greece was pretty lenient when it came to men being very sexual with each other. So yes, full homo. Essentially, it was just a bunch of straight men that were occasionally into homosexual relationships between each other, as long as it kind of fell into the stereotype of female and male, heteronormative bullshit. And now what about women? What about Sappho? What did she do? Well, these same straight men couldn't really fathom how women could have, well, sex in general, but how women could live their lives without them. It was pretty they just couldn't understand it, It's not like it's narcissistic or anything, but on to the next part. Sappho was controversial for many things. Many things. Apparently, personality wise, a lot of people didn't really like her much. But I think it's just because she was opinionated. I don't think that's a bad thing, but whatever. So, yes, she became really controversial. People actually accused her of having indecent acts of a sexual nature with women, flirting, simping over women in general. This actually kind of led to the occasional burning of her work by promiscuous priests at the time, and just really in general envious men who tried to stop her really great poetry, because at this point she had actually become so popular. She was pretty much all the time compared to Homer. So I think it was the comparison that kind of tickled people's feathers a little bit, but whatever. They actually went as far as making a whole parody about her. It was called Sappho, actually. So kind of redundant. The main protagonist was also Sappho. However, the Sappho that they tried to describe, I guess, was so overly sexualized. It was so sexualized to the point that people believed that they had to have been two Sapphos because one of them was nothing like the other. They were complete polar opposites, which caused a great deal of confusion, really, as to identify the actual women or the muse of the parody. Because one was actually described as a muse, very much put on a pedestal, etc., as kind of role model for the women in Greece. But the other was a whole, just basically a prostitute. Now, if you're wondering how else men tried to strip her of her personality and life in general, well, actually, some writer, which isn't really worth naming, he's really not. He actually went to the extent of writing about and painting her suicide. Why was she suicide, But anyways, he actually claimed that she had committed suicide by throwing herself off of a cliff because her love wasn't reciprocated by some ugly ass fisherman. Which doesn't really add up since her entire 85% of her work was mainly focused on feelings of desire and love and heartbreak. But for women, So the puzzle pieces didn't really fit, you know? Why would she do that? It didn't make sense. But I generally don't really believe in his claim. Plus there's no proof, but yeah, it just mainly just doesn't really add up. Now simping for women in general, so let's move on to that. To show you just how much this woman was out here simping, it was kind of pathetic. No, I'm joking. The first poem that kind of caught my eye, there's many actually. There was one of that she writ to Persephone, and she was really just out here simping for a goddess and asking the goddess to kind of remove the feelings of heartbreak, which, what a mood. And the goddess actually did, which is kind of crazy, but yeah, I would definitely check that out if you're interested. Because apparently Sappho had a way with the ladies. She had convinced how many women to fall in love with her at the time. I think that's why men were so mad, because all the attention that was meant to be on them had quickly shifted. There was actually one other poet, I forgot his name. He's really irrelevant anyway. And he had described Sappho as short, ugly, and something else. And he couldn't be more salty. However, after reading so many fragments of poems, my favorite has to be the one titled I Have Not Had One Word from Her. Now, this one to me was just had me cackling because it just kind of sounded like a reversed U-Haul, basically, kind of like a more long distance thing. She was crying because her lover was leaving, and her lover was leaving unwillingly. She didn't want to go, she had to. No one knows why, really. Sappho herself described her as, honestly, I would like to die. She was leaving me, saying goodbye. Her cheeks wet with tears, and she said the same. What a cruel unhappiness, Sappho. I swear that I leave you against my will. This is what I replied to her. Go, farewell, and remember me, for you certainly know we cared for you. If you don't, why then, I would like to remind you. If that's not flirting before she leaves, I don't know what is. So yes, the poem goes on for way longer, it's pretty much 3 to 4 paragraphs, but I genuinely think it would feel more personal and you would enjoy it more if you guys read it for yourselves. So I'm gonna leave the links somewhere. And yeah, that was the story of Sappho, a great lyricist, writer, teacher, and just overall woman who made many other women fall in love with her. Thank you for tuning in today, and I hope you come back for the next one. Also, if you have any type of feedback, leave it down below. I would really appreciate it. And thank you. Thank you for listening.